So, a very warm welcome also this time to a new edition of Europe Calling, the web-based exchange platform on European politics. This time it's a very special edition, and I'm very happy about it because we have here as guests the three competitors for the Spitzenkandidaten leading candidate of the European Green Party. So, and as Greens, of course, we have always one woman and one second person, which can also be, of course, a man. That is also the case with most Greens in Europe, and certainly for the European Greens. So the European Green Party is at the moment holding a process of competition, which will then be decided by the Council of the Parties of the European Greens. This will be explained by our participants from the Committee of the European Green Party in a second. But of course, Europe Calling is about you and your questions. This time it's a bit special because we have a competition, therefore you see the clock as always. So as it will be then later when you discuss with the leading candidates of the other political parties in Europe, you will have a strict time limitation. And therefore the clock will be running so that each of you has the same amount of time. Of course, participants are welcome to suggest their questions. And I can also already say, I will only take questions which are contentious. So boring questions like, do you want less CO2 in Europe, which all Greens want? They are excluded. We want, well, Bas is not so sure of that. So it's, so we want questions which are contentious. And I get really angry if the three of you always agree with each other. So I hope we hope that we find some disagreements so that people have also some indications. Many of you who participate are perhaps also voting on the council or talk to those who will be voting at the European Green Party Council. So we want to see also some differences beyond that. Greens, of course, love each other always and all the time, even across borders. Therefore, I would like to give now the floor for 4 minutes to Evelyne Huytenbroeck. Sorry for my horrible Flemish pronunciation. She is from the Committee of the European Green Party and will explain us now the process towards selecting the Spitzenkandidaten and what that process is about for European Greens. Evelyne, you have the floor, and she joins us per telephone, so you can't see her, but you can listen to her. Please.
Yes, thank you, Sven, and sorry you cannot see me, but I shall take only 4 minutes, not more, and to explain, as you said, this process and how it's important for EGP and for all the green parties in Europe. This I can say this adventure. So it's really for us this Spitzenkandidat procedure a real opportunity, and also for the next months I can ensure that it's also a priority. And maybe I can point to three reasons. First, I think it's important to create enthusiasm in intern of our parties, national parties, for these European elections. You know, it's not always very easy in this time of Euroscepticism. Second is also that we want to generate a real dynamic across the borders and a transnational initiatives. And then third, show that Greens are maybe the more pro-European between the party, and that they have also a very strong project for Europe. So we must see this first. Finally, this webinar is the first event that we organize. It's a kind of pre-campaign, and we anticipate also the timeline of the 2019 election campaign that will begin in January. And so some of you remember maybe that the Spitzencandidate scheme was really successful in 2014, and so the committee last winter we decide to build on this experience. So we began in May 2018 in Antwerp, where the council and the delegates decide that we will elect two candidates, and we opened the call in June 2018. The contenders had then to present themselves till the 14th of September and be nominated by their member party, but also it's important, they must have also the explicit support of at least 5 additional EU EGP members. It's important because this is to emphasize the transnational characters of the European elections. And then our 3 candidates presented their political agenda in 2 pages, and they know that they will represent the Greens in leading transnational debates with the other political families, and that they will campaign transnationally to support our program. They are a kind of ambassador of the Greens during some months. And with EGP, we can confirm also that we will be very fully transparent during the process, and also that we will provide all the information. At the next council in Berlin, end of November, the candidates will present themselves in Berlin in our council, and we prepare. This council is really concentrate on our manifesto, the program, the priorities, and the election of the Spitzencandidate. So they will present themselves to our delegates, more than 100 delegates, but we prepare also a program with a plenary, with external people who can come, and also after the election, of course, a press conference. It will be really end of November. I can say the start of our campaign. And so in conclusion, I want to say that we were really very happy to see that we received the candidacy of 3 persons of very high level, with experience, with a strong European project, full of passion. You will see that this evening, I hope, for this, I can say, a real adventure. So I can conclude and say that let's go for this first step and the campaign in the campaign. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that explanation. And now we'll start. So the format will be the following. First, each of you has 5 minutes to explain your project. How do you want to green Europe? What is what you will bring to that green campaign? And then afterwards, I've prepared a number of questions where I hope that we can find some agreements and disagreements between the contenders. And of course, as always with Europe Calling, you have the opportunity to ask your questions. But in this series, in this edition, it will be more the form that you type your questions into the questions section, where you can type it and it's visible to me, and I will read the respective questions. And the more the questions have a chance to find some disagreements between the 3, the more likely is that I will use it. So, I would now like to give the floor to my dear colleague, Ska Keller. She's at the moment, she's at the moment leading our, co-leading our Green Group in the European Parliament. And and I guess she's now in Brussels while I'm based in Frankfurt at the moment. And it's for you now to speak 5 minutes. And I would like to remind you, everything which is said from is recorded and can afterwards be watched on YouTube and the like. So be careful what we say. Please, Ska.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Sven, for organizing this. My name is Ska Keller, as Sven has already mentioned. I'm currently the group president. We always have two group presidents, of course, as Greens. And I'm a member of the European Parliament since 2009. So I've been here already 10 years. So that's a crazy long time. And I'm getting a lot of gray hair, even though I can't yet compete with Sven. I'm trying my best. And that's as Evelyne mentioned already last time at the European election, we had a lead candidate system. We had two of the lead candidates, and I was one of them. So that was a fantastic experience, I have to say, because it gave me the opportunity to travel really all around Europe, meet with green activists from everywhere, and that was really fantastic. Well, what do I want to do now? I think we're currently really at a very crucial moment inside the European Union, because more than ever our European project, our European ideas under attack from the far right, who are attacking Europe because that stands for things like welcoming refugees, it stands for transnational democracy, it stands for working together for a common, better future. And this is what they don't like. They don't want to go back. They want to go back to nationalism, to their, their national chauvinism. And this is a really big danger for the European Union. So you might think, okay, yeah, dangers to the European Union might come from outside, Trump and stuff like this. But no, I think the big problems that we have are really coming from internally, like from inside of the European Union. And we as Greens, we need to be very strongly standing against that. We need to be making clear that we're the political force that stands for overcoming borders, working together for a better future, and really defend Europe. But of course, defending Europe is not enough. We also want to change Europe. And I think, or I would like to push that in particular 3 issues, of course not just, but let's prioritize here a bit. And that would be the ecological, social and democratic Europe. Ecological, very clear, we are entering a big risk with the climate change. There is not much time left where we can meaningfully attack climate change and make sure it doesn't get too bad. And this is really something where it's clear that we need the European Union to act, because one member state alone cannot do anything there. But also on the social area, we need to get more ambitious, because right now we have a lot of rules on the economic level on how much debt you're allowed to have as a member state, for example, and you have to submit your budget and get approval from the Commission, etc. But you don't have the same value to social aims, like, is there a health insurance for everyone? Are any children poor? Stuff like this. So we really need to have a same level for the social goals at the same level as the economic goals, and minimum standards everywhere in the European Union. And lastly, on the democratic, that is one area where I think, well, not I think, I see that democracy, rule of law, freedom, also freedom of press is really under attack in many member states. Look at Hungary, where Orban is criminalizing NGOs and free press. Many journalists, well, many, but 4 got killed in a year in Europe, which is really crazy. In Romania, the government wants to legalize corruption. In Poland, the independence of the judiciary is not guaranteed anymore. So this is really under attack, and the European Union needs to find ways of how to counteract there. And we're a bit short of instruments there at the moment. We have very limited possibilities there, but this is something where it comes down to really core European values. Europe and the European Union was always in a very attractive force, also because it meant democracy and rule of law, and that's why I think we need to defend it. So it's really big. This is really a crucial election next year, and we should really attack it head on.
Thank you. Perfect. 4 minutes. You can see members of the European Parliament are used to speaking only to limited amounts of time. So let's see, Bas, whether he got the same amount of practice. Bas, it's your 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and good evening, Europe is probably how you say. Thanks for organizing this. I think where I will start is, of course, the reason why I went into the European Parliament. I was in the same year at Ska, so 2009. So it's not 10 years yet, but almost 10 years indeed. And my reason to go into politics was really climate change. I, from background, am a chemist. I have been studying climate change. I did climate change research before. And after many years of doing that, I learned one thing, and that is that there's a lot of scientific knowledge out there. You can write beautiful reports and papers, but in the end, it's the politicians who are ignoring the facts and who are ignoring the urgency of addressing the issue of climate change. I think in the last 9 years, I have been working on climate. I'm also for the Green Group, the spokesperson on that issue. So I have a track record on that issue, which is of course a core value of the Greens. What I see changing now is that more and more center politicians are talking about climate change, which is very good. More and more people are saying we have to do something. The Paris Agreement, how often do you hear politicians talk about it? But the big question is, who is going to do something about it? And there, my experience is you need a strong green voice that is pushing the issue of climate change, so that we are sure that people are not only talking about it, but also acting on it. And I do think that over the last couple of years, I've been shown to be able to also build majorities in this house to at least take steps on climate change. We're still not there. The Green Project is still not there, but we have made really progress. And I think for the next term, it will be really crucial that a strong green voice is out there. Is that my only priority? No. I think what is very important is that we have to, as Greens, very clearly state the values of Europe. And this is also what Ska said, it is under attack. It's under attack by the populists, but it's also under attack by governments. And not only in Central Europe, but you even see it slipping into Austria, which is getting more and more to the West. You see that different countries in the EU are really touching upon the core values where Europe stands for. And I think that is really something where the Greens can have a strong voice. But it's not only the fight against the populists, and that is very clear, because if you do that, you will only have a discussion, either you're for or against Europe. And that is a debate where a lot of center parties love us to be, because then you will have a big crowd of parties saying we are in favor of Europe, and you have the populists saying, see, we are the only ones who have a different voice out there. And I think that is dangerous, because there's so much that we need to change about Europe. And that is something that we Greens also want to say. We are pro-Europe. We really believe in the European project. We need it if you see about issues like climate change. But at the same time, we also know that this Europe needs to change economically. We need a social Europe. And what is most important in that, it's really, if you now look at current Europe, it's a kind of a heaven of multinationals. We have an internal market where they can deliver all their goods. They can shop the employees wherever they want. They can play against each other. And then in the end, on taxation, they can go to the lowest level everywhere in Europe. This is the really liberal Europe that we have created. If we are not going to change taxation so that we are going to make sure that multinationals also pay a fair taxation, then Europe will not be social, and that really will endanger the existence and the future of Europe. And that's my project. I want a social Europe. We need to change that. I want a Europe that stands for its values, and I want a green Europe. And I think I brought these issues along with me, and I'm happy and really looking forward to do that. And as you see, Sven, I also did this in 4 minutes and a couple of seconds more.
Thank you, Bas. And you already scored an important point with me, because you didn't make any negative comment on my gray hair. I
thought of it, but I deliberately didn't.
I was pretty sure of that. But now, Senator Petra de Sutter, you have the greatest title of all of us. And now it's your 4 minutes, and we are looking forward to getting to know you better.
Thank you. I thought it was 5 minutes, but okay, we reduced it to 4. Thanks. I'm Petra de Sutter. I will present myself a little bit because unlike Bas and Ska, I'm not in the European Parliament. So maybe a lot of people that are following European politics, and especially what is happening in the EU and the European Parliament, don't really know me. I'm From background, I'm a medical doctor. I'm a gynecologist, actually a fertility specialist, but I've always been interested in I would say, effects of the environment on the health of people. And that brought me to ecology when I read, 30 years ago, I read Silent Spring, the famous book by Rachel, what's her name, Carson. We all, understood then the effects of pesticides, DDT on the health of people. I see infertile patients, I see patients developing cancer and so on. So this was 30 years ago why I became an ecologist, and my scientific background still makes that I look at these issues from a very scientific basis. That means that the issues that I'm studying, that I've been working on together with Bart Staes in the European Parliament for many years now, are endocrine disrupting chemicals, are the GMOs and so on, which are of course very important in agriculture and food and so on. So this is one of the top subjects that I would like to address or to develop further, because it's also important for European citizens. They really want a Europe that protects them, and looking at environmental issues and health issues, it's clear that Europe is not delivering right now. I won't repeat what Bas and Ska said about climate change. I think it's at the core of our project, and we cannot not discuss this. This is really the basis of what's happening now, and Europe really needs to take the lead there. We can't talk about economy, we can't talk about social issues if we don't address the ecological issues. This is really something that is so important, and people count on us. Our voters really look at us for these issues. These are really central. On the other hand, since now 4 years, I'm a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe as a Belgian senator, and I've been working on human rights, democracy, rule of law, and also migration a lot. Now, if you would have asked me 10 years ago if democracy, rule of law are important issues, I would have said, well, things are going fine, and elsewhere in the world, maybe there are some problems. But right now, we all agree this is at the core of the discussions at the EU level. Indeed, looking at what is happening in countries like Poland and Hungary, it was already mentioned. This is something that worries us, should worry us a lot, and also should be at the center of our agenda if we want to be European politicians. Again, also showing to European citizens that our core values, that are green values, that are really the basis of our both social and ecological project, that these values are essential, and we should really look into strategies how to make sure that the populists, the Eurosceptics, are not taking over by building our own narrative, not by finding yet again enemies against whom we have to fight, but by building our own narrative, a positive, constructive narrative full of hope and of perspective. That is what people want. And we can see in the recent elections, also local elections in Belgium, but the elections in Germany, that the green message is really being heard, and that a lot of people are following us. So I'm very optimistic and positive towards the future. I think people are really ready for the green wave that can be an alternative to the populist narrative that we've been hearing, lately. Now, maybe to add to some of the subjects that I have been working on, I would say already all my life. But as a gynecologist, I'm very active in the field of sexual reproductive rights and health. And I have to say it now, people will find out anyhow, or they already know, I'm a trans woman. That means that also the LGBTI agenda is, of course, very important to me. And both are human rights, so I'm working on these in Strasbourg in the Council of Europe. And I think that they are part of our core values that we have to defend, which are at stake here, and where a lot of conservative and other people do not believe anymore in, and we have to defend them until the end. I'm almost at my 5 minutes. I could continue much longer, but I will stop here, Sven. Thank you.
I'm not nervous, and I'm sure we will hear more from you. I would like to share with you two questions, which are in a certain way arrived here, and then they fit to each other. So there's one question from Alexander Mercouris. He's saying, sounds to me rather Greek, how do we want to touch the hearts of the people in Europe and motivate the Europeans to believe that Europe makes sense for them, especially in the eastern and southern countries? And there's a second question, which is in a certain way similar, and it comes from Angelika Gutzeit. What can we do against the anxiety of people? So perhaps we'll start with you, Bas, this time, and I try to turn around a bit the order from question to question. So what can you say, Alexander and Angelika?
Well, I think it's really very important that as we Greens have a positive message. I think people do understand why Europe is needed. I mean, people see that issues around the globe are bigger than any country, and no country can fight it alone. If you see where Europe is lying in the world and you see what's going on outside Europe, people do realize that Europe is needed. I think that is not the problem. The problem is that we are then going very often in very technocratic issues, plus, and that's what we have seen, of course, in the past, is that Europe, with its kind of economic focus, has always given the feeling that Europe is only there for multinationals. Saving banks is more important than saving the economy for people they work in and delivering the jobs. And I think there people will have to see a different Europe. And that's why I also said that we need to fight as Greens, not on the side either you're for or against Europe, but to show that there are voices very strong for Europe, but also for a totally other Europe. And that is a social project which I think will be in the end really getting into the hearts of people. And that's also, of course, our task to show that it's be possible. I don't know whether that was, but I think it was more or less 1.5 minutes, because the time is continuing and that's a bit disturbing.
Yes,
this is a small criticism on
the limit of time and space is one of the disturbing things in our condition, dear Bas. Petra, what do you say about these two questions?
Yes, well, I might continue what I said previously, that indeed we should give a positive alternative to people that takes away their anxiety. First of all, we need to acknowledge their anxiety and understand where it comes from. That's the only way to be able to address it. We have to understand why they are anxious, why they are listening to these populists that are telling untrue stories to them. One of the problems, I think, of the EU is, of course, its construction, its democratic deficit, the fact that people often feel that they're not heard in Brussels. There is a lot of distance. Decisions are made, in a non-transparent way. I mean, we might discuss this later in another question, but it is clear that there are a lot of construction errors in the European Union, so that people don't trust European politicians or European politics and what the Commission is doing, what the Council is doing. To bring this back to the citizens, that means, of course, maybe looking at these construction errors and revising them. Again, we can discuss this later, but it really needs to be clear to citizens that Europe should be a project that protects them. And therefore, this social Europe, of course, is so important. If you have a minimum income or maybe even minimum wages or whatever, some health coverage that is standard, that would show to people that Europe is there to protect them and not only to, indeed, as Bas said, of course, work for the multinationals. So we need fiscal justice, we need social justice all over Europe. And then only people can understand that this is a project that is also about them and protects them, and maybe they will love Europe again. Now, the question was also specifically about the East and the South. That's complicated because with the financial crisis, we've seen how little solidarity there was in Europe, and with the refugees, we see exactly the same thing. So it is very understandable that people in the South and in the East are maybe not liking Europe as we would love it. And so having more solidarity, trying to solve these issues might again make people in the South believe in the European project, just as we in the Western countries are doing. I'm stopping here.
Thank you.
I continue. Indeed, I think what we need to look at is what do people want? What can they reasonably expect also from the European Union? What is there that we can actually or should deliver? And indeed, since you mentioned the South and East, the whole issue of social rights, stopping austerity, as Bas and Petra have mentioned, absolutely needs to happen. This is somewhere where the European Union can and should defend people's rights, social rights in that moment. And what we've seen so far is unfortunately very much the opposite. So with all the Troika stuff, it was unfortunately the EU sitting on the table of making really tough cuts in all sorts of social systems, and that needs to be reversed. And that's why we need to have the minimum standards. That's why we need to have really the European Union taking care that the social rights are not undermined anywhere and that they are part of the European identity. And looking at the East, where the same social issues very often apply, even though we very often don't see that, but that touches also on the whole issue of democracy. Like, I have so many people who come to me either like physically or they write to me, and certainly also everyone else in the parliament, to ask us as MEPs to help them to fight corruption, for example. Corruption is a big issue that is being brought up again and again and again, that are saying, well, we are not having access to free media, for example, and so on and so forth. Like the whole issue of rule of law and democracy that I mentioned earlier and that my colleagues have also mentioned. And there the European Union needs to be strong to say, yes, we stand with you, European citizens in Romania against corruption, for example, or in Poland with the women, for example. And I think, but we also should look beyond that, because if we look at the emails, but also petitions that arrive in the petitions committee, but also elsewhere, a lot of that concerns environmental questions. People who are concerned about the environmentally protected area that they live in, that they live next to. People are really concerned about the environment, and often we think, okay, environment, maybe no one is interested, but that's actually not the case. I've been to Bulgaria looking at a nature reserve, for example, and people really care about that, and they expect the European Union to help them in that. And I think there we should be more active, because we have instruments, the Natura 2000 areas, for example, and that we need to do. But apart from that, we also need to make sure that people can experience the European idea, the European Union, cross borders, live somewhere else, so that we don't only have Erasmus for the lucky few, but really have a European experience also for everyone.
I think every one of you stressed the need for more social Europe in different ways, and you made that a cornerstone of your priorities. I would like now to ask one more contentious issue. One thing is Europe to set standards, like Petra said, of fiscal justice, of minimum income, of minimum social security. On the other hand, there's a big debate, should there be more redistribution between the member states? In our national states, we have strong redistribution mechanisms. In Europe, that is rather weak. Would you support stronger European redistribution, or in order to use the nasty word of a stronger transfer union? So, starting with you, Petra, would stronger transfers between member states be part of your project? And if yes, how should they look like? Please, Petra.
Yes, well, I would say ideally, yes, of course, in the ideal Europe that I would believe in the end, I think there should be social justice, and if needed, redistribution from richer countries to poorer countries. Now, the thing is that we are very far from that reality. If you look at the solidarity between member states and the subsidiarity that always plays a very big role, of course, in the EU, where member states claim their sovereignty, I don't see this happening very soon. So I think at this stage, this might be an illusion. I think that the first steps that could be taken without having to do too much changes or changing treaties or whatever is really working within the existing frameworks. And we could set some steps forward to go to, for instance, a minimum income or minimum wages that are, of course, weighted against the GNI or the standard of living of the member state itself, and one standard is that the minimum wage should be 60% of the median wage in certain countries. I think that could be realized within the existing frameworks that we have. Of course, that means priorities. That means priorities also in the budget. That means that we have to reallocate budgets to help this social changes in Europe and to make sure that there is more social justice. There is a lot of fiscal possibilities there. It has been calculated, if I'm not wrong, that every year there is 1 billion euros that is lost, if you want, in fiscal fraud or evasion. That's 7 times the budget that the European Union has. So if this could be used to enforce a social agenda and to make sure that indeed, let's start with this minimum income, could be realized, that would be a huge step forward. So that would be one of the mechanisms that I think could be acceptable and could be negotiated between member states.
So, do you have a redistributive project, and how does it look like?
Well, actually, I really don't like this frame of saying transfer union, because this is really something that the conservatives and the right wing want to use in order to discredit any sort of social policy. But we actually already have a lot of transfers that are happening. We have the social funds, we have the agricultural funds, we have like the whole European Union budget is basically the member states pay in, and like not everyone gets the same amount out. So we already have a bit of that, but as you said, it's very weak. And yes, I do think we need to strengthen these investments into our common future, because that's what it's about. It's not about, you know, sending 10 euros over to Warsaw or whatever. It's about investing into our common future, into the public goods maybe of our common future, and making sure that also tomorrow the economy will function and we have a common Europe and so on. So I totally think that needs to be strengthened. We already have the investment fund, which it's a good start, but we need to watch out into what we invest. So only into things that really push for the ecological and social transformation of the economy, and that makes sense also for a long-term future. And what I would also like to see is that we get moving on the idea of an unemployment support for member states. So it's also sometimes called rainy day fund. So you have a fund where member states pay in, and if a member state is in economic trouble, then they for some time can take money out of that, and when they're doing better they pay in, and someone else will be in trouble, maybe hopefully not. So stuff like this in order to really create a support, but also to encourage an economic balance in the European Union, because in the end that's for the benefit of everyone. If just, you know, one country is doing well and the others are bad, or just a number of countries doing well, everyone else is not doing well, then that's also not helpful in the long time, even for those that are currently doing better. So,
Bas, I'm curious, you are from a country where the word transfer union is as toxic as in Germany. So what's your perspective on this issue? Sorry, Ska, for continuing to using that nasty word. Bas.
No, I think you'll keep using the word. And sorry for always getting dark. We have this ecological parliament here that always turns words.
Yeah. Then you know exactly you are 15 minutes later, because it switches off after 15 minutes. I think, as always, you have to use the terminology in your way. So transfer union, we have already a transfer union, and I'm not talking about the EU budget, because that's peanuts economically speaking. It's 1% of the total European GDP. Where the real transfer union comes from is, of course, the goods that we are exporting from north to south on a daily basis. If you look at the economies, you have 2 very big exporting economies in the north, and Sven, Ska, that's us, Netherlands and Germany. So we are profiting the most from this internal market, and we are transferring every day our goods, and we are very happy that other countries are buying our stuff. We are making a lot of money thanks to this transfer union of goods. So then the question is, of course, is this a sustainable way if you don't have other issues in place? One of them is on taxation. And again, here it is key when you are talking also about the transfer union. And this is, of course, I can say as a Dutch coming from a tax haven, we are very good in, while we are exporting our goods, at the same time attracting offices from big companies from other European countries to Amsterdam, where we are just collecting their taxation without any real economic activity. So I think that is another one where taxes are being paid, the real economic activity should take place. That is not very popular in the Netherlands because we will lose a lot of that, but we all know it's also a pretty it's a low employed economy that we are having. So that's one. Secondly, on the budget, absolutely. That is, of course, a way where we are addressing issues. And I've been working also on the Juncker investment plan to make sure that it's going into the right direction. But more important, and that is what's going to happen when there are macroeconomic shocks. Because this is all talking about the normal circumstances, but there will be moments in time when there are such divisions within the EU that you will see macroeconomic shocks in some part, and then there must be an automatic stabilizer which can help to address those issues. And you can do that through, for example, unemployment schemes, where you see where there's a huge sudden unemployment. That could be a reason why there must be an automatic flow. But I think in order to really have European support for these kind of projects, people need to have the trust that others are not misusing that. And I think there I do refer what I think is important for the Greens. If you look at the EU budget, if every year we notice that of the payments of the EU budget, there are many questions about it, whether it's invested in good stuff, and every year it's the Court of Auditors who is releasing critical reports, then I think for the Greens, in order to keep the credibility, but also the public support everywhere, you have to make sure that these kind of issues are controlled very strictly so that people will see, okay, now we have trust in it. And then we also believe that I can sell that message in Germany or the Netherlands, because then they feel like it's sufficiently also controlled, and then I think there will be much more support also for the European budget than there is now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I would like to follow up on a combination of that question and what has been raised before on the question of anxieties. So many of you touched upon the subject already. This election will be shaped a lot by debates of those who want to renationalize, and on the other hand of populists. Obviously, we know from all sorts of statistics, those who vote for the extreme right are not the ones who vote for the Greens. So we are not competing usually exactly about the same voters. But of course, what should our role be? Or perhaps you have a different opinion on that, but what should our role be in order to fight back renationalization and populism? So what is the consequence and our role in that important issue of these elections? So perhaps you start that time, Ska.
What to do? Just unmute. What to do against populism and also right-wing extremism, I suppose.
And what's our role as Greens in this? So that was my question.
I think our role as Greens can be and should be, from my point of view, to be a real counterpoint to the far right, to those who want to, as we discussed, attack Europe, attack democracy and rule of law, and be a political force for those people who are not happy with this move to the far right that we see in many, many places in the European Union, because there's a significant number of people who really want to work together, who want to build that common future, who are interested, for example, in protecting the climate. 92% of Europeans are saying we need to do more on climate change. So that's a huge number of people who are currently not finding any political representation except for us, because we're the only ones who are really caring about climate change. And they need to have a political home as well. Everyone is currently talking about, oh my God, we need to, close the borders, send the soldiers, whatever. But no one is saying like, hey, look, we have there are other problems here. We have a climate crisis, we have to work on social rights, etc. And we need to be that political force that finds real solutions for real problems, and also says, indeed, we have a hopeful view on the world, in the sense that we know things can go wrong, but we have an idea how it can go differently. And we're courageous and we're optimistic that we can shape the world into a better place. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, at all that we should not listen to people who are concerned, be it about Europe, be it about migration, the change of the world, identities, and so on. But to say that, to tell exactly, well, to listen first, but then also to say, look, there is another way than just to be afraid how things are going. You can actually shape the world. You yourself as an individual, you can have an impact on the world around you, in your village, in your neighborhood, wherever. Because I think this possibility, or this way of being optimistic, or like seeing that you're actually able to shape your own surroundings, that enables people also to have a more, well, I don't want to call it optimistic outlook, because optimistic sounds like, okay, it could go wrong, it could go well, let's hope for the best, but that's not what it's about. It's about saying you can actually change things for the better, and it doesn't have to go all bad and scary. So that would be my approach, while always making very clear we're the force who believes in human rights, and it's very unfortunate that these days we have to say that. We believe in the European Union's values of human rights, democracy, rule of law, and freedoms, and we will always fight for them.
Bas.
Yeah, can I say that we are now making a bit the same mistake as many people. We are focusing very much on the populists only and make them much bigger than they are in the end. In the end, people, a lot of people, it's the big majority in the European society, wants to hear a positive, attracting story on Europe. People do understand that Europe is needed, but people are concerned. They are concerned mostly about their jobs, whether they still have a pension later on, whether their children can still afford education. That's what the people are concerned of. And until now, I think that Europe, the EU as an institution, has not been addressing those concerns sufficiently. And then, of course, people started feeling that things are getting too big to handle, and Europe is just part of the problem. And that's what we see. And then people turn away from Europe, and then they feel that there's only one force that is listening to them, and that is the anti-European. So you go to that because at least they listen to you. And I think if we are only going to say, well, no, but you know, we have a problem indeed with the anti-Europeans, you are making them bigger and feeling that you are just joining the forces against them, together with the Christian Democrats, together with the Social Democrats, those who built this Europe that is until now a race to the bottom socially, because we are still not fixing the tax holes in our system. And I keep on coming back to that because I do think this is really key. If in the end Europe is not putting a force which shows that we stop the race to the bottom, we make sure everyone pays fair taxation, and that makes sure that there are income for government so that they can keep on maintaining the social security, then people will feel that Europe is letting them down, and then they turn away. So that would be my message.
Mm-hmm. Petra.
Well, I would just to try to say a little bit different things than what was already said, as you asked, and I'm not disagreeing, but I think if people are afraid, and we've talked about anxiety, and populists give answers to easy answers to people, but they're of course the wrong answers, we need to try to understand, first of all, where the anxiety comes from, and we need to deconstruct the narrative of these populists, showing that they're wrong and that their solutions are short-term and will not work in the end. In this perspective, I like the reasoning of Georges Monbiot. I'm sure everybody knows him, who says that people always want narratives, the big stories. They have the social democracy and the solidarity story, which was then turned over in the neoliberal story that didn't work. So with all the crisis, now people are looking at populists and nationalists and so on. And it's always the other that is the enemy. We need to understand that. And as I already said, we need to bring our own narrative. And well, I'm an optimist, Ska. I'm very sorry that, again, I don't think that's naive or empty. I think it's a way of looking at things and being hopeful, thinking that things will be all right. And usually you can help that and make that work as well. I think we need to tell people that there is an alternative for what is being said by the neoliberals and the populists. They're quite often the same. And one of I would say, the basic things in our narrative is starting bottom up from the people themselves, from the citizens. We all know the projects that are going on where people are taking initiatives themselves, and they're building these initiatives out of passion, out of altruism, often on a voluntary basis. And I may say that we Greens are often the political translation of these initiatives. We are really are building our own stories on the stories of people that really want to take this initiative. And if we look at all kinds of volunteers working with refugees or in other domains, it's clear that there is a lot of positivity and optimism out there, and we need to translate that and build our narrative on this, because conventional parties also in the EU are not offering any solutions to these questions. They're often part of the problem, I may say. So I think we Greens have a really powerful way of giving this alternative to people. I stop here.
Thank you. I think what you were saying together is that we need positive alternatives, and we have to tackle the real problems people feel. On the other hand, as in the European Parliament, we are very oft faced with the situation that we might have majorities for positive solutions in the Parliament, which is already difficult enough. But then we get blocked at the Council. So looking, for instance, at the big success of Ska on migration policy, where we had really a progressive position in the European Parliament, even with the support of those who in the member states often are not progressive at all when it comes to a humanitarian approach to refugees and even some of the migration issues. So we are often faced with deadlocks in the Council. So should we as Greens push therefore more for a multi-speed Europe? So under which conditions should we be in favor of doing things only with those countries which are willing to do something? Or is this dangerous at the moment, where we see that divisions in the Council are already so deep, so that the whole construction might fall apart? Petra, you have a lot of experience from the Council of Europe, so with even more states to act together, what do you think should the European Union do? And what should we as Greens defend concerning this idea of multi-speed Europe? What do you think?
Well, I think we need to be pragmatic. In an ideal Europe, the one that I discussed already at the social Europe question, in the ideal Europe, of course, there's no multi-speed Europe. Everybody is with us and we leave no one behind in all the issues that we want. You know, the idea of the ever closer union. The reality today is already very different. We have a multi-speed Europe in so many instances. We have the Eurozone, the Schengen zone, we have all the initiatives in the Department of Security and Defense and so on, where a lot of countries, member states, have exceptions in all kinds of agreements. There are exceptions, there is opt-out. The whole decision-making system, of course, is responsible for this, and we have always struggled with being you know, a supranational organization or an intergovernmental organization, as the Council of Europe is. It is an intergovernmental organization, of course. It's a different kind of organization. So I would say, yes, unfortunately, we will need to move forward with certain member states that can move faster in certain areas, as it is already the reality. This is how Europe is constructed right now. If we want another kind of European Union, we will have to change the treaties, to change decision-making procedures and so on. And this is, at this stage, I don't think it's a possibility that is very realistic. So the short answer is yes, although I would prefer, of course, that it would be different.
Bas, do you disagree? Can you disagree?
Yeah, there I disagree. Where I disagree is the point that I will never accept a multi-speed Europe on our core values. You are becoming member of the European Union because you subscribe to the core values of this EU, of this Europe. And we will stand for that. That will always be a Europe that we believe in. And I will never accept any different multi-speed Europe on these kind of issues. And that also goes for climate change policies, a green and a social Europe. That, of course, will be always the core of the European project, and I don't accept a multi-speed Europe. Where I do agree with Petra is that there are issues where we do know that in the current setting, it's very difficult to get to certain solutions. I keep on coming back to taxation because it's so crucial. And why is Europe failing that much on taxation? Because it's still considered a national competence issue. And that means that we can only get something on taxation together off the ground if all the countries agree. Well, you can wait for a very long while until 28 countries will agree on an issue like taxation. And that's why on these specific issues where we are trying to make progress, then of course we will have to see that there will be projects where there will be a multi-speed Europe, but at the core, there will not be. On specific issues, there will be, as Peter also said, on the Euro and Schengen, we already have them. Can I just say one thing on the council where you said, well, you know, you see that in the council quite often it's blocked. I also think that politically we should challenge countries far more. For me, the best example is still, if you see Salvini from Italy and Orban from Hungary on one stage, showing as if they are fighting the same fight. Excuse me, Italy is asking for more solidarity on dealing with refugees. If there is one country refusing every day to offer any solidarity, it's Hungary, it's Orban. So there, we should challenge them. Why is Salvini teaming up with Orban? He should be his biggest enemy when you are asking for solidarity. Salvini should turn to Germany and the Netherlands and countries in the north and have a debate with them. He can reach an agreement if he wants. If he keeps on talking to Orban as his friend, he deliberately doesn't want a European solution on refugees, and we should challenge that in Italy.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree very much with that, and it's also funny that Salvini hangs out so much with the Austrian FPÖ guys. You know, they all want to, the Austrians want to stop the refugees from coming from Italy, the Italians want to send them all to Austria and northwards. It's totally funny, and indeed, yes, we should challenge that more often. I'm very much against having any sort of, you know, hard membership and a soft membership, or any sort of core and periphery, because that will always mean, you know, leaving the small countries in the east and the south to the periphery, so they're not anymore part of the real club. And it will also really soften the European values, as Bas mentioned before, and that we really shouldn't have. We have one European Union. But what I can accept is an instrument that we already have, the enhanced cooperation, so that certain member states can say, okay, we go ahead, but it's always open for everyone to participate in. Actually, while I was here, when I came across it was in the Home Affairs Committee, especially with regards to family law, actually, stuff like cross-border marriage, divorces, and stuff like that. Very interesting. So on certain issues, certainly, but I don't want to have a core periphery or soft and hard on whatever. We're one European Union. We signed up for it. It was voluntary. Now here we're all stuck together. Sven, we can't hear you.
Sven, wake up, Sven.
I'm waking up again. Ska, I was listening still.
I was finished.
Ah, great.
A while ago.
Yeah, there was an interruption.
From me. That's not fair.
I'm the only one at the moment based in Germany, and Germany loves its surpluses so much that our infrastructure is really poor. And I don't go into this. And beyond that, I quite agree with what Bas said on these economic paradoxes in the EU. But we are worse off in infrastructure than you are, Bas. So, well, I would move now a bit to beyond issues, some of the politics coming after the elections, and we should then speak a bit about the campaigning. I like one question very much, which was put by John Worth, a Brit based in Berlin, and here's his question. You face the following theoretical situation. So imagine you are now in the European Parliament and have responsibility for the Green Group in whatever role. And now, after the European Parliament elections, with the European People's Party having emerged as the largest group, there is the idea to replace Manfred Weber, who was their Spitzenkandidat, with a more centrist candidate, let's say Michel Barnier, as Commission President nominee. The Commission President needs the majority support in the European Parliament, and the nominee needs the backing of the Greens EFA group. What would you do? Demand the EPP goes for Weber because he was the Spitzenkandidat and EU-wide democracy must be made work, or demand the EPP goes for Barnier as he is more pragmatic, closer to the Greens, and does not rely on the Hungarian Fidesz. So, in the end, what John is asking is, how important for us is the Spitzenkandidat? Would you, in any case, say, after the elections, only a Spitzenkandidat who manages to find a majority in the parliament can become Commission President? Or is there a certain situation where you could move to different conclusions and be more pragmatic, as John described in skillful words? So perhaps this time, do you want to start, Petra?
Yeah, well, it's for me, it's not an easy question. Of course, I don't know the candidates you're talking about as well as Bas and Ska. I was prepared to answer the question, what about Weber? Would you support him?
No, you can answer that one at the same time. So can you imagine voting for Manfred Weber?
Honestly, not really. I think he has not shown a great leadership, as far as I understand, and I talk to people that know him better. He's a great candidate. He's not an outspoken, charismatic person. He's definitely not on my side of political agenda. He's I would say conservative, rather right-wing politician. So I think I disagree on many things that he would stand for. I would much better have a candidate that would be more progressive. So if Barnier would be that candidate, I already would be satisfied with that. But of course, then the trap in your question is then we abandon the Spitzenkandidat idea. Of course, you know that already some groups have not wanted to participate to the Spitzenkandidat mechanism. So that means, are they then excluded? I think, again, I would first want, of course, a Spitzenkandidat that follows the rules, that has played the game according to the rules that we are also following. But on the other hand, if the perfect other candidate would come up, with a progressive agenda that we could follow as Greens, then I would be willing to step away from the principle only go for a Spitzenkandidat, but very reluctantly. But I think if this candidate would be put forward, that I would be able to follow him. I'm not saying it's Barnier. I will not say anything about that. I would rather not have another EPP president of the Commission, and maybe there can be another majority that goes for another candidate that is more progressive. That would be my answer.
Ska, what do you think?
What was that?
So if we stick with John's scenario, so what do I do? Well, I'd probably submit my own candidacy, or I look for the other groups, because there's no there's no whatever. It's not automatic at all that the EPP is the only group that gets to deal about Commission presidents. Quite the opposite. A Commission president would have to find a majority inside the European Parliament. Now, where could this majority come from? Sure, I mean, there will be Weber, who's, you know, being a candidate. Sorry.
15 minutes later. No.
Oh, wait. Don't take that off my time. So he's running, and he would get the support from EPP for sure. And as I've been reading in several interviews, he's also looking more to the further right, and there's a lot further to the right. Wait, it's the other direction. If that happens, if he's getting supported by the far right, then the center left and center whatever would not support him. So he doesn't have a majority. I mean, depending on the outcome, of course. So it would actually be much more possible for a center or center-left candidate to find a majority, someone who's acceptable for EPP, but also for Social Democrats, for Liberals, and for us. So I think it's actually very likely that it's not an EPP candidate who will, or like not Weber or Stubb actually, because he's still in the race, that will find a majority. I think it will rather be a candidate from the center, or maybe even center, let's say. However, what for me is very clear is that I'm not going to vote for any candidate who's not been running as lead candidate. And if we're talking German here with Spitzenkandidat, then you always need to say also Spitzenkandidatinnen, please, with an asterisk. So, because the lead candidate process, that's really about democracy, about making sure that you run, that people see who they're going to get when they vote for a party. And for me, that's a basic rule of democracy. And then to have someone else, that for me is not acceptable. So I'm looking forward to having much more choice than just an EPP candidate, but really have a broad spectrum to have debates with those other candidates. And I think really the next candidate, the next Commission president, definitely has to have been running. John will know better how to phrase that as lead candidate.
Bas, so now we see some differences emerging. I'm very happy. Bas, can you contribute to these differences?
Yeah, but I will be more coming to the same conclusions as Ska, to be very honest. And I think, why are we doing the Spitzenkandidaten? This is a democratic process. We are building a Europe where, in the end, you would like to see real European elections. We all know that we will not be there tomorrow. It's a day by day, well, in Europe, year by year, maybe a decennium development, European style, but this takes time. And the Spitzenkandidat is one step in further democratization of really European elections. Of course, this needs to be combined later on with a part also of European cross-border lists, because then you can really have the point that the Spitzenkandidat can be elected by all the Europeans, which is not the case yet. So therefore, by the way, we really have to call out on the liberals, who until now have been wavering what to do with the Spitzenkandidaten. And this is really the most hypocritical stance that you can think of Guy Verhofstadt, the fighter of European democracy. He was a candidate the previous time, being there very big, and then now saying, because he wants to get Macron in, and suddenly saying, well, I don't know whether Spitzenkandidat is very democratic. Come on, don't throw out all your principles because you want to have a big group. That would be my call to Guy Verhofstadt. I think we are doing this because we find it important institutionally to build towards European elections. That's why I would stick to Spitzenkandidaten. However, indeed, the biggest party, or Kandidatin, sorry for the German correction. Unfortunately, until now, the other parties have mainly, I think all of them have come with men, by the way, the other parties. So, party in. And anyhow, so what I think is important is that now you really, oh yeah, it's not the biggest party necessarily. They will have the first draw. They can, Weber, if he wins, and it's likely he wins this week in Helsinki, he will have the first chance to draw a majority. But be very clear, there will be, in the end, because we will do the elections very well, there will be a progressive pro-European side which he has to take into consideration. If he's not, then he will not get to a majority and others can do the drawing right. But in the end, it will be a majority that needs to be formed, and that's depending on the program. We Greens can think of that, but it will always be led by someone who was a candidate in the Spitzenkandidaten or Kandidatin race.
I didn't know that we are moving now into progressive German lessons, which is important to get that right. But
you always get lessons when you have Germans around the table.
And I have to say, we not even know how to write our press releases. Everybody does it a bit differently in order to cope somehow with the complexity of taking the gender side into account. So that is another subject. But I saw here now some real differences, and that was interesting to listen to. When we now move to the campaigning period for which you are actually applying, so becoming European lead candidate, I try to avoid the German problem. If you are getting one of the two lead candidates, how European will be your campaign? You all have responsibilities on the national level as well. You are running as candidates. So how much will you be on the European side? What will you offer to your fellow Europeans who are following us also today? So, and how do you want to reconcile that with your national obligations? So what will your contribution be? Perhaps, who starts this time? Perhaps Bas, why not you? So please.
Sure. Well, I think what is very good is that all three of us, we are members of strong national parties, which means, yes, I will be the lead candidate for the Dutch Greens, but we will have a full campaign team ready, including our party leader Jesse Klaver, who will also do European campaigning in the Netherlands for these elections. So I do think that gives me room to really also campaign in Europe. We will have the normal debates that will be organized by the parliament, etc., and there we will participate. And the good thing is we can alterate, right? So there is always because we have two candidates, so that gives already a bit room. But I'm also very eager to go to the different countries, of course, depending on the invitations of those countries, because it's also in the end very important that there is a willingness and that people feel that it would be good for their party if the lead candidate of the Greens is going to campaign in that country. I cannot do that continuously, but I will for sure those countries that are thinking that it would be good to have a lead candidate of the Greens into their campaigning, I'm absolutely willing to do that, because I have the feeling that nationally I have a strong and professional campaign team ready to do the Dutch campaign at the same time. But it's going to be a balance.
Petra?
Well, yes, I think I would join Bas in what he said. I think also in the Flemish Greens we have a very strong team. As you may know, in 2014 I campaigned together with Bart. I was in the second place on the European list then, and I will hope, it's not decided yet, of course, to be able to campaign again with him and with a lot of other people that are very enthusiastic, that are already there. We've already a campaign team in place that is already doing stuff. So I think it will be possible to combine the European campaign with the local campaign. I also think that European campaign as leading candidate will definitely have an impact in the local campaign. I mean, in the Flemish media, I'm sure it will be followed. It's not every day that we have Flemish leading candidates at the international level. So this will even support and help the campaign. I think there is a lot of possibilities with new media, social media, new technologies. You don't really have to be everywhere at the same time. And as Bas said, we will be two people, of course. And then finally, just to add, I would, if you would say, where would you go then? I definitely would focus on these countries where the Green parties need us most and where the voters need most to be convinced. And that would be in the Southern and Eastern European countries in the first place, because there's a lot of people that are waiting for our messages where in these countries there is a problem on values, on democracy, on corruption, as it has already been said. So these would be countries that I really would focus on. But again, social media can help a lot, as we are doing now. Of course, we're also doing this online. So a lot of things can be done from a distance, I'm sure.
Ska.
Yes, well, I've been doing this once already, and as I mentioned, it was great fun. And I really have to say that traveling was a big part, not just of the experience, I would say, for myself, but of the impact, because it brings you together with party activists, but then you can also get a lot of local media, and especially in places where as Greens we're not so super strong, that we're maybe not getting into the evening news directly, to have that impact in the local press is super cool and it's super important. So definitely traveling is big, even though I totally agree with Petra that we need to also have a very big focus on social media, and because it just reaches out to so many people, and not everyone is able to come to an event that you have in one town from the neighboring town as well. So yes, I will. Last time I was indeed on the German list, but not on the place number 1. Next weekend I'll be running on place number 1 for the German list. Wish me luck for that at least. But we're also hoping for a strong, we'll have a very strong team, and Sven will support me a lot, hopefully. Oh
no.
Dream team. But definitely I'll be in Germany also more than last time, because last time I was really privileged to only, basically, I can say that, focus on the European level. This time it will be more of a balance. And that's why I think also it's really cool, well, then in any case, whoever gets elected as lead candidates, to really count on both candidates to be helping each other, both to be traveling. We also would all of us need to count a lot on early planning. So as Bas said, if there's any campaign managers listening from the different member parties, make your plans early and not 2 days before. That would really help to facilitate things, because it's really important that we could get good visibility and also use the chance that we have to make the lead candidates known, but also our local party and their candidates and their issues.
Yeah, I would like to, for the final round, share one question which I saw, or 2 questions which I saw coming up from different people, and they are somehow connected. So people are asking about your European vision. So what is basically your position on a deep democracy in Europe, a federal Europe, in the end, something like a European Republic? Do you support that idea? So do you think Europe needs to be reinvented in that sense? So this is a question which was asked several times. And second, and that is a bit connected to that, how do you see the prospects for the European Green Movement? So how can we build a much more European transnational movement? We can see already with this debate, it is not immediately selling to listen to that important competition. And we have seen very often that it was hard to build truly transnational European mobilization campaigns, exchanges. People were asking, how can people as Greens meet on the European level? How can they learn from each other in the process of the campaign? In your eyes, shall there be common moments in the campaign where people can feel across the borders that we are doing one campaign together? So like the Pulse of Europe actions where people and activists could meet and network and so on. So what are your ideas in order to first have on the question of the finalité of the European project, And secondly, how to get closer to a truly transnational European green political movement. So, and with these two big questions, I would like to conclude. You have about 3 minutes each, and therefore, I turn now around the order from the last time. So it will be Petra starting, and then Bas, and then Ska. And I'm looking forward to listening to your responses to that one. Petra.
Okay, well, it's a $1 million question, of course. Do we want the United States of Europe? I would say in a century or something, maybe that could be the outcome of the further European project. But as it looks now, probably not. I think we will have already a lot of work to do to keep what we have and to deepen what we have, maybe to widen. And I think about the Balkan countries, which are coming up. And I can tell you from the Council of Europe, a lot of other non-EU countries are maybe dreaming one day of being part of that family. And that touches upon maybe the second question. So for the time being, I don't think it's a reality that we can talk about a federal Europe or United States of Europe. I think that's a far remote dream. But ultimately, it would be my hope within, if you needed 100 years, it would be possible. The second thing is European Green Movement. Well, I think what we're doing right now is already strengthening a European green idea where transnationally people are coming together and discussing their projects, the green projects for Europe. We can expand on that. We can do much more in that area to make people aware of the bigger European movement that we can build. Again, I would concentrate on countries that are not, for instance, right now represented in the European Parliament within the EU, and maybe also the non-EU countries. I remind you that the EGP, of course, has the Council of Europe member states. It is the larger geographical, historical Europe that ultimately is the Europe I think we should be discussing. And there's a lot of work that remains to be done in that area. I also think we need to, also strengthen the support for Europe within our own national parties. And I definitely have the plan of doing that in my own party. And if I will go campaigning for the European elections, I've already thought of just, when you visit people at home, in the streets, on the markets, campaign for Europe. And then if you start talking about the idea that you have for Europe, you can say, well, this is the green Europe I'm talking about. But, really trying to make people love the European project, European idea again, by educating, by telling them why it's so important. It's just what we have been doing the last 1.5 hours to try to convince people that there is no alternative. Of course, we are in Europe. It is inevitable and it's a good thing, and we need to present it like that. All right, I stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, first on the first question, Republic of Europe or Federation of Europe, I think you always have to be careful in getting into these terminology issues, because people always have some kind of idea by that, and then they like it or they don't. And for example, federation in a lot of countries sounds very, very not attractive. But I think then you have to challenge people. What is exactly a federation? A federation means that you are very clearly defining what is being decided at a supranational level and what at the national level, like in Germany, which is a federation, where there is a very clear definement of what the Bundesländer can decide on and what not. And yes, it is pretty and that is something that you really have to make sure that you are dealing with that, and that people do know then, okay, that's at the European level. And in the end, the European Parliament is already a federal circumstance, right? I mean, why are we having a parliament at the European level? Because there is a decision-making body at that level. And I think that is very important to realize. And then, of course, also you need to have to put the democratic control in place. And I think there is really one of the big issues still, the lack of transparency, the democratic control on those bodies that are taking decisions at the European level. And that should be our core step towards it. And then whether you call it a federation republic, Let us as Green more focus on the democratic value of that level and to improvements there. Brings me to the transnational green movement. I think what we are doing already, and Petra said it, is that we see that our progressive movement, pro-European, but also for another European sound, is broader than only the Greens in a lot of countries. So in those countries where maybe the Greens are not perceived yet as a strong force, let's team up with those forces that are pro-European and pro-change. We see them in Romania, we see them in Italy, we see them in Hungary. So let's team up with them and make sure that the Green family will be broader than only the Green Party, so that that will be a start of a transnational movement, progressive, pro-Europe, pro-change.
Gut gebrüllt. Bitte, Ska.
So my vision for Europe is to have a union that cares about the ecology, about climate, that implements social rights, that implements human rights, that is a union that is diverse, that is also welcoming, that cares about global justice, plays a positive role in the world, and of course implements a lot of more democratic changes towards its system and institution. And then how you call that in the end, I really also could care so much, because for me it really depends on what's inside the package and not so much what's outside on that. What I don't like so much of on this debate about finality is that I don't want to wait for the revolution before I want to make positive changes, and positive changes can be done now already before we have to wait for that revolution. Now, how do we become more cross-border? I think election campaign is always a good time for that, because we have a common manifesto, we have then the two common lead candidates, we will have common cross-border action, but I think we need to invest also a bit more into the long-term European movement. I agree with Bas on the civil society movements, on all these initiatives. And I would also like to draw the attention that I think it's really important to learn this Europeanness. And for that, the role of Young Greens is really important. We have European Young Greens, and I think it makes a real difference. Like if you've been going through, so to say, their educational program, if you've been learning Europe through that idea of meeting other young people who follow the same dreams, who have the same ideas, or where you can build ideas together. And that's how we, in the long term, build a really, really European movement and a strong party who will rule the European Union.
Thank you. So it's really 7:30, and I thank you very much. We have proven Greens can share time fairly, even and resources fairly, even without pressure. So thanks a lot for your discipline. I found it absolutely fascinating, and I think people who listened attentively, they could also feel what we will get from each of you. And it's really hard to make a choice. So everyone who is a delegate on the council will have a difficult choice to make, I'm sure. I hope that there's everywhere now a debate in the different parties with for whom to vote, and it's a difficult one. In any case, we will defend strongly our common positions, and I would say, as always, also this debate has shown that Greens agree a lot across border with each other, and that is not by chance that it's so hard to find the differences, because we are already a common family. But of course, when it comes to power issues, we could feel that there are much more differences, and there were also subtle differences, and I'm sure that will trigger big debates under which conditions might we vote for a certain Commission President candidate, how tough we will be on the democratic side when we are tempted with nice policy offers. So these will be interesting discussions, and I'm really looking forward to campaigning with the three of you. And I wish you very well for tonight, and from tomorrow onwards, everybody can have a look on that splendid video. And please stay tuned. This is the 23rd edition of Europe Calling, and there will be, of course, other European webinars to follow in order to make democracy
Now you're gone, Sven.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sven. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.